Hello friends, welcome back to my show. Tonight we are going to discuss toolkits. This is the first part. A number of toolkits were in the news recently. There was the Greta Thunberg toolkit, then there was the Farm Law Protest Rally toolkit and so on. We'll see what it takes to make a toolkit for anarchy. And once you know the ingredients, you'll have no problems in identifying the blueprint, or as a matter of fact, constructing your own toolkit. As usual, first a claimer and then a disclaimer. This is not a political video, but it gives you the skill set to recognize rabble rousers. The content of this video is based on fundamental principles of biostatistics, epidemiology, human psychology, and social behavior. The political fallout is only incidental. So friends, we all love fear and horror. Fear sells until you stop buying it. So don't buy and the fear will vanish. Let's see which fear has been selling so well. Here is a selection from the cover stories of Time magazine, and it's the same fear in a different year. There it goes, 2003, 2004, 2005, and the list goes on until the current crisis of 2019 corona epidemic or pandemic. You must remember that the basic requirement for selling fear, gaining sympathy for a cause, requires two basic ingredients. First, you must say goodbye to science. Science including all observational facts. Next, you must forget the scientific method. And once you have bid farewell to these, remember, if you look at this picture, you'll realize that you are no more in the business of collecting facts and trying to draw conclusions. That's old school science. There is no place for that in the toolkit. What we really need is first get a conclusion and then try to fit the facts wherever you can. You are bound to succeed. All this can be done in 7 easy steps. If you follow these 7 steps, you could be propelled to fame, or you could be even slapped with a 20 lakh rupee fine, as happened very recently. Or you could at least engineer a nuisance. Before you begin, you have to pick a risk. Something that is going to scare people, something that will generate fear. It could be a disease, it could be a pandemic, it could be a disaster, man-made or natural. Or it could be the environment, a hole in the ozone layer or extinction of a species from the face of this earth. It could be identity such as gender, race, faith or class, or it could even be a legislation. The choice is yours. All these are tickets to success. Step 1. Remember, novelty attracts. Don't take up old issues. Even animals love novelty, let alone people. You might argue that Time magazine has taken pandemics for so many cover stories, but remember, each time it was a new pandemic. They never repeated that because even Time knows novelty attracts and it pays. The second step is that the risk must be unprovable. What do I mean by that? It means that either it does not exist, or even if it exists, it is too small to evaluate. I will explain the second point at length in the next slide. Here is an example that illustrates the concept of unprovable. Let us consider the campaign to clean up nuclear waste. A hazardous waste site needs a cleanup, and say there is a risk of cancer of 1 in 10,000. Do you know statistically how many people you will require to observe in your observational study to find the truth? For a risk of 1 in 10,000, you require 500 million subjects to be observed over the course of time. This number is almost twice the population of United States. In other words, it's simply unprovable. Good choice. Step 3 in your task is that the risk must be intuitive. Even the dumbest person must say, I know it. I always knew it. Tell me something more. So these are typical expressions which will guide you to the most intuitive fear. I know it. I know it's something bad. It doesn't need research and it must sound scientific. That is the bottom line. Remember, we threw science out of the window and the scientific method before we conducted step 1. For scientific, you can substitute the word legal, constitutional, or whatever you like. This works. Step 4, the risk must be ubiquitous. In other words, it must be everywhere, all around us, even though it is invisible. Make sure that it looks like lots of people are exposed to it. That is the beauty of this word ubiquitous. What do we mean by exposed? A lot of people are going to be affected by that. And best of all, it is difficult or impossible to measure it if it is ubiquitous, simply because it is everywhere. It's a very abstract concept and nobody will question you to put your finger of where it is. Step 5. The risk should be involuntary. In other words, I have not created that. It is somebody else who is doing it. For example, an industrialist, a politician, or a nexus between the two. The bottom line is, it is not my fault. I didn't do it. It should not be something that makes me responsible. For example, it should not be smoking, drinking, drunken driving, because then I'm responsible for that. That simply won't work. So remember, this risk must be involuntary. There has to be somebody to put the blame on, and it works. Step 6 is the most beautiful one. It is one that requires no personal sacrifice. Your investment is nil, zero. Don't pick a risk that is going to require people to sacrifice or give up something. For example, give up fast food, mobiles, something that they love. Anything near and dear to people should not be made subject to personal sacrifice. Also, somebody else must do it. That is important. I don't want to give up anything on my own, but others must. For example, it could be mobile phone companies should not construct towers. Companies should not be manufacturing CFCs because it punches a hole in the ozone layer and so on. Step number 7, or the last step, is choosing a risk or a topic which is difficult for the opposite party to defend. Most government activities, such as changing laws, even when they are part of an election manifesto, can be opposed because you have to stand on high moral ground. That gives you a distinct advantage because it puts your opponent on the defensive. Finally, you know that this is not going to work because technically you have chosen a flimsy project just to induce fear into the minds of the people. But don't worry, this is not going to last forever because once you have done your job with one particular fear, you move on and you take up the next. So you're never going to be out of a job. Remember, putting the opponent on the defensive is really something that works for you and it has a fairly long play out time. Now let us see if this toolkit which I just described works. We are all aware of the long drawn out protests against the Citizenship Act amendments which happened about a little over a year ago. I'm not going into the legal aspects or the course of events. We are just going to do an analysis on the basis of the 7-step method. Let us see how well the CAA protest project stands up. The first point is novelty. Yes, it was the first time that such an act was introduced and there was no past history of that. Excellent, you get 1 point out of 7. Is it unprovable? You remember what we meant by unprovable? something that is too small to evaluate. Remember, this hardly affects 1/4 of 1% of the entire population. That too, those who are not citizens. So essentially, it is unprovable to have any evaluation of its effects socially, psychologically, or otherwise. Is it intuitive? Yes, because any action by the government is bound to be seen as something that is against one party or the other, against one minority or against one particular group, whatever that group is. Is it ubiquitous? Is it everywhere? Yes, because there will be a witch hunt. So it fits into that category too. The next category is it involuntary in the sense somebody else is doing it? In this case, it is the government in power. It doesn't matter even if you voted that particular government into power. Another one is, does it require any personal sacrifice? Of course, you have nothing to lose. Nobody who is an Indian citizen is going to be affected by this amendment. So there's no personal sacrifice expected of you. It fits the bill perfectly. And finally, moral high ground, which is the beauty of all this. Indeed, you are on a morally high ground simply because you are fighting somebody else's battle. I am not affected, but I'm fighting for the dispossessed. So it gets a 7 out of 7 in our toolkit. Now that you have understood the anatomy of a toolkit for fear, or for protests, or for any other public nuisance, you can do a similar analysis of the so-called farmers' protests against the new farm bills. I'm sure now you feel confident that you have graduated to the next level of competence. You can do your own analysis about the COVID-19 crisis. Is it man-made? Is it fear-based? Or what it is? I'll leave it up to you. So friends, in the next video, we shall see how we can apply this technique to scientific projects, and that too on a global scale. Remember, don't be deterred by the word scientific even if you have never studied science in your life. Because as you remember, we have already thrown science, scientific method, observational facts out of the window long back. We have now been empowered by this 7-step toolkit. Rejoice! So friends, that brings me to the end of this video. And in case you wish to become a practitioner of the art of the 7-step method, remember all you have to do is choose your fear, follow the 7 steps, and keep moving. Don't get stuck with the fear yourself. Don't buy the stuff that you are selling for your own consumption. If you remember these 3 important points, you are bound to have a very successful career in fear mongering. Thank you and meet you in the next video. Until then, bye bye.